Is that the mistake you did last time?
Hey, good morning.
Did you record it on the cloud instead of the computer?
I recorded it on, I don't know. We were just talking about how we haven't put out a podcast in a while, and that a
We
couple
did record it.
couple of weeks ago we recorded one. Our kids crashed it. It was a great epic podcast, and I can't find it on my computer for some reason. So
Could be
we
it's just under his hundreds of files.
we may share that with the world in another time, and it talks about wrapping up 2022 and what we're expecting for 2023. So if I find it, we'll post it. If I don't, I won't.
But yeah, we ended 2022 with a event in the Dominican Republic that it was hosted by Trevor Boehm, Leela,
My shirt was off a
and
lot of times.
Jeremy from the Heart Space on Civilized Nation. And Jeremy is Jeremy Love Bombs, right?
Long distance.
Long distance love bombs. There we go.
Dr. Long Distance Love Bombs.
Yeah. And it was really fun to be with it was like 20, 29 of us, about 30-ish. Yeah. Fun to be with a big group of people, all bringing in the new year, free of alcohol, with open hearts.
Yeah, we were just talking about how amazing it is that when you're in environments like that, and like now that we don't drink, the environment of like being in a more intimate setting without alcohol and just connecting with people, having fun, dancing, like in the Dominican Republic, the 31st, we were dancing and having a good time, and there was no alcohol, and it was just amazing.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, last year that was an agreement, I guess, or commitment that we made was not to drink alcohol in 2022. I had one tiny, what is it, wine, beer? I don't know, something for my sister on her birthday, but it was like literally 6 ounces, but that was it.
So she's coming up on her 1 year sober.
Yeah.
My 1 year sober was November 24th of 2021. And the reason why after Thanksgiving, I just committed. There's something has to change. There were some things going on medically for me, but more importantly, I wanted to take a next step in my development.
Yeah. So here we are. So today we're not going to talk about any of that. What we're going to talk about?
I don't know. Tell me what we're going to talk about. She just hit this on me, and I was like, man, I like that.
So
we go off the chest a lot. We really don't.
Well, we have a little bit of a list, but we never know what topic we're going to talk about. And there's some days where I'm just like, yeah, I'm not talking about that. And today I was like, okay, we can talk about this. So I want to talk about pregnancies, births, and how that's changed us as mother, as father, as people, and where we are today with it, and kind of how that's also is becoming a segue for the work we want to do in the world.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, real quick, to interject here and say that part of a powerful relationship is that in the breakdown of power is to be influenced and influence in the relationship. So I'm going to be influenced today and let Giselle take the lead a little bit and see where this goes.
We all know we really lead anyway. No, I'm kidding. So I'm going to try to do these kind of quick, because if I get into the detail of every single birth and pregnancy, we will be here for 3 hours, maybe longer. So kind of give you an overcap of every pregnancy and birth, and kind of where I was mentally, physically, emotionally, all of that. Making my lemon ginger tea over here. I need some honey. So I actually like my tea with milk and lots of sugar or agave, really sweet. Not a honey tea person. Well, my throat hurts a little bit right now, and trying to help my body. So I was like, stick to honey and just the lemon ginger tea. We'll see how this goes, but you're probably not gonna like it.
Yeah, she actually has she's drinking honey with a little bit of tea.
Honey with a little bit of tea, yeah. That's how he makes fun of me, because I'm not like a huge coffee drinker, but I'll have coffee, and I always add like way more milk than coffee. And he's like, you just like milk with coffee. I was like, basically, coffee's too bitter for me.
So if we haven't lost you by now, that's great. Thank you for staying.
Hey, I'm just letting people know what I'm doing here because they were gonna hear my spoon swirling in my cup. It's just preparing my tea. But back to this. So my first pregnancy was very average, typical in the sense of like I didn't know anything other than what you see in movies and little stories you hear, around your community from friends and neighbors and whatnot. Like I had no idea women gave birth at home, and maybe this is not typical for everyone, but I feel like it is the majority of people, or at least back then. Now, I think after 2020 happened, people's eyes have been like blown open with a lot of things. How you can just have a home birth and a free birth and all this, but I'm talking about 2012, 2013 when I got pregnant. 2012, 12, no, 13. 13. It was the same year. I got pregnant and gave birth the same year. Okay. So 2013. So it's like, yeah, it's not that home birth didn't exist, but it wasn't, there wasn't like that huge popularity on social media about it and things like that. So it wasn't really something that I had heard even growing up. And like, as far as I know, my mom, even my grandma, they all gave birth, excuse me, in hospitals or with some type of medical assistance. In my family, same thing. Like there was no women that I personally knew that had given birth at home. So, and he was in the Navy at the time. So I was just like, oh, you just go to the clinic and that's appointment number one, like confirm the pregnancy, get an OB, and go to your appointments every month till the moment you give birth. And that's all there is to it. And I want to say it was around 7, 8 months, something like that. I think it was like almost my 8th month. I had an aunt at the time who was going through nursing school, and she had watched The Business of Being Born. And I had been talking to her, like just asking her for advice because she was like the closest person that, for my family that I really talked to about these things. And she was like, one day she calls me and she's like, hey, have you heard of The Business of Being Born? And I was like, no. It's a documentary by Ricky Lake, for those who don't know. And at the time, I believe it was on Netflix. I don't think it is anymore. And she's like, well, you should really watch it. Like, it has so much good information, And I was like, okay, cool. And at the time, I was like researching everything, watching all the videos, all like everything I could. But I was getting a lot of generic information from, basically websites like the CDC or websites by the industry, if I must say. So all the information kind of says the same thing, like check in with your doctors, go to all your appointments, don't eat the tuna, don't, like all this stuff that's just ridiculous to me now. Get your vaccines, like make sure you get your weight and all this stuff. So I watched The Business of Being Born and my mind was blown because I didn't know that there was like women just giving birth at home. And I was like, oh my gosh. And that was the first time I've heard of Ina May Gaskin, who was a revolutionary midwife in the 70s, 80s, something like that, where their stories are pretty cool of how they started this movement and then they ended up settling in Tennessee. Unfortunately, today, they are not what they used to be. And they did end up getting licensure and they practice as midwives now and they have, follow these rules and things. So what inspired me about them is not how they practice today. So when I watched this, I bought her book, Spiritual Midwifery. And about half the book is just full of women's stories of how they birthed on their own with literally just other women that none of them were doulas or midwives or anything. And they just went learning through attending each other's births. And eventually, there was like the women who knew a little bit more than the others. And that's kind of how they, became like their own local midwives. And that really what it is to be a midwife is to be with women. It doesn't mean that you have a license and you study and all this stuff, but you do have a knowledge of how to assist and be with a woman through this process. And I was so inspired. And I remember that when I got to the second half of the book, that I got into like all the medical things to know. I read like 10 pages into it. I never finished it. I didn't care for it. All I loved was like the first half of the book. I was like, oh my gosh, these stories are so amazing. because it also went so much further than the medical aspect of birth. It was very much like the spirituality, the emotional, how a man's role and energy plays into birth. Like I'm talking about like women being in full dilation and going backwards because they had an issue with their husband that they hadn't like hacked out, and he walks into the room and it's like and if you say that in a hospital, they'll be like, that's impossible or that's an emergency. And it's like, no, because so much more plays into the layers of birth. um Energies, emotional issues, like all of this can arise in these moments. And yes, the body, to protect itself, is like, well, no, we can't do that yet. Like there's something we gotta figure out before this baby comes out. And it was just so inspiring to like read things that you don't hear about normally. And after that, I remember I called the clinic where I was going to, and I asked them like, hey, can I have a home birth? And they're like, yeah, no midwife is gonna like take you in at this point of your pregnancy, like you're too far along, which was bullshit, but I didn't know that. So I was just like, all right. And I just hung up the phone and I was like, I guess this is it. Just have to have the hospital birth. But I was already inspired by the home births. So I told my husband, I was like, I'm not going to be one of those women who at like the first sight of labor, I'm running to the hospital. Like I will go when the baby's head is like coming out of me. And I was like, I will wait to the last possible moment. And I did. I waited literally to the last possible moment. I didn't know this at the time, but I went to the hospital after I already had hit transition. And for me, typically after I hit transition, the baby's born within 30 minutes, tops. But so I waited at home. My grandma at the time, this aunt that I had been talking to, surprised me by flying my grandma in. I hadn't expected anybody to be there with me. It was just going to be my husband. And at the time he was on a ship. And if anybody knows anything about the military and the Navy, is, they don't really always are like super open to things happening with the families. Like work comes first, everything else is kind of second. But I also had told my husband like I wanted to labor alone because he was like very anxious about the whole thing. And I knew that. And I was like, if he's at home, he's gonna be driving me nuts. And then like the questions, like I don't know how to answer these questions myself. Like if he starts asking me like, what's going on? Is the baby coming soon? Like, well, I'm like, I don't fucking know. This is my first time. So I was like, just go to work. I had started laboring at midnight, or yeah, at midnight. And I woke him up, or no, I don't think I woke you up till 3, to tell you, but I started at midnight. Um, and eventually I told him like, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is it. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm in labor. And when he woke up around 5, he's like, are you sure you still want me to go to work? Like, I can call out. And I'm like, no, like, go to work, leave me alone. I'll call you when it's time. And it was probably around like 9 o'clock or 10.
It was around 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I don't even think I called you. Did I call you? I think I
You
couldn't
did call me.
contact you.
You were texting me back and forth, and
I remember I called you multiple times and you weren't picking up because you didn't have service. And I was then trying to figure out how to call your ship, but I don't think I ever found their number. So then I'm like texting you because at this point, like I was timing my contractions. They were like a minute apart, and they were just like, like coming.
yeah, and my supervisor, my main boss, in the Navy, your department head, he was very in control of day-to-day operations at the lowest level. So, when my wife was texting me, I reached to my chief and was like, hey, my wife's about to give birth. I need to head out. And he said, hey, let me go talk to Chang real quick. Update the chain of command. And Chang was like, not right now. You need to do this, 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 and this. And so after back and forth for possibly 30 to 45 minutes, I went to medical and I talked to my medical department and the senior chief and the LT doctor. I was like, hey, my wife's, I'm just curious. My wife's in like having 5 minute apart or a minute.
No, they were like a minute to like 90 seconds up then.
We've had so many kids that I don't sometimes
I remember because they were like, oh shit, you need to go right now.
Yeah, so I told them, like, hey, my wife's having like a minute apart contractions. They're like, you need to leave now. I don't care what your department head says. I will vouch for you. And they sent me. My department head didn't send me. So I sprinted home. I sprinted to my car and drove home. And a real quick funny story.
Yeah.
I had keys in my pocket the whole time.
Wait. You're skipping a whole part.
It's important.
okay,
It's a
the
little
first
embarrassing.
part was I was selling this IKEA bed that morning. It was we had gotten double beds from IKEA on accident, and we had this brand new bed in packaging. And I was like, I don't think we're ever gonna use this bed. And I had been trying to sell it on like Craigslist or something. And that morning, I finally get somebody who like wants a damn bed, and the guy's like, I'm really far away. Are you sure you're gonna be home? Like, I'm coming, like I'll get it. And I'm like, sure, like that's fine. Even though like I knew I was in labor, I was like, he'll get here before I have this baby. So the guy is on his way. Alex gets home and he's like, all right, let's go. And I'm like, no, we can't go. And he's like, why not? And I said, because I'm selling an IKEA bed. And the guy's coming from really far away. And I was like, I don't want to be like that fucked up person who makes somebody drive and then doesn't give them the product. And I was like, I'm waiting for him. But by the time the guy came, I couldn't. Like I was like deep in the shit.
She was throwing
Yeah,
up.
like I already had threw up twice. And I was like, yeah, you need to go fucking sell this bed. Like I can't, do it. I was like, the guy should be okay with it. Like, this is how much I charged him. Like, go give him the damn bed. So my husband, there was two entrances to the building. There was like a back door to the parking lot, and then there was a double front door out to the front to like the sidewalk. So the guy came through the sidewalk. So my husband went out, and now you could tell them we were apart. So he
Yeah, I
goes
went out.
out to give him the bed.
I went out. I gave him the bed. Did the transaction, and then I came to the door, and I think I can't remember specifically, but I think I patted my pants. I didn't like put my hands in my pants, in my pockets, and then I started pressing the button.
And I wasn't in the
And
apartment.
they
I
were in
was
the
I was
apartment.
already sitting in the car waiting for him.
So
And
I
he
call her.
calls.
I call her, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm I'm locked out the front. I need someone to come, like, let me in." And
And
so
I'm like, fuck. Like at this point, I'm like waddling, walking super slow. And I was like, I'm so nauseous. I feel like throwing up again. I was like, now I need to go.
I don't know if it was you that came and got me. Was it?
No, it was me. I had
Okay.
to come and get you. And I can't because I figured my grandma wasn't gonna figure out the keys for the gate and the other
Yeah.
gate. And I was just like, I'll just go myself.
So she came and got me to save time.
Yeah.
She came and got me. We walked slowly, as fast as Jasil could go to the
And I don't even think was I in the car yet? Oh no, yeah, I was in the car, yeah. And then you come,
and then when I
he
went
gets in the car,
and I pulled my keys
and
out of
he
my
pulls
pocket.
the keys out of his pocket, he turns on the car, and I look at him and I'm like, you had your fucking keys. And he's like, what? And I was like, you just pulled your
Yeah.
keys out of your pocket. And he's so confused. He's like, what? I said, you just called me to come get you from the front of the building. You said you didn't have your keys, but you just, and he was like, oh, I don't know what's going on. And I was just like, oh, it's that bad. Like he was that flustered. And I was just like, oh, geez, this is way worse than I thought. I was like, he didn't even know he had keys in his pocket. And that's when I realized, like, he was like extremely flustered, anxious. I don't know. What were you feeling in that moment? Because clearly you weren't thinking straight.
Yeah, no,
Oh, there goes your phone.
oh, my phone.
His
That's
phone
my alarm.
Hold on, phone alarm going off somewhere.
It saved me.
Yeah.
7:30 in the morning. And let me just make sure that I silence my phone.
Just turn it off.
Yeah. So that's a rookie mistake. I don't know if I've done that before.
Yeah, your phone usually it's like alarm or dinging or something.
All right. I mean, I was really nervous. I think it's important that when Jasil back in, I think it was April of 2013, told me that she was pregnant, I didn't really I was speechless. I cried a little bit, but ultimately, like when I let the emotion settle, and I didn't know, like I was like, okay, just we're having.
I remember that we both talked and we both said how scared we were because we had no idea what we were doing. Like it wasn't planned. Like we weren't like, oh my gosh, we can't wait to be parents. Like in my head, I wasn't gonna have kids till I was 30. I was 23 at the time, or 22.
22.
I was 22. And just kids were not on my radar. And it wasn't something that was gonna happen for at least 8 years in my head. So we were both, I remember, like super scared. We're like, we don't even know how to like take care of ourselves. How the heck are we gonna take care of a whole nother person? And I think a lot of that too comes from we don't realize like, and I tell this to women, I've spoken to women now, like in their 20s and 30s, who are like scared of having kids. And I was like, remember, you don't get an adult or a teenager, like you get a baby. And I was like, I think a lot of our fears come from like, we think we're gonna mess up parenting. And honestly, it's set up so perfectly because you get a newborn that all they need you to do is feed and love them. Like really, that's all they need you to do. So if you can feed someone and you can love them, you'll be good, at least for the first year. Like you'll be good. And then, like start reading your books and start doing your research and all of that. And yes, like know what type of parent you want to be. Like obviously if you have time to prepare, like prepare for it. But if it happens, like for us where we weren't preparing for it, like just know like you're not gonna get a teenager smack talking you. Like that's not what you get. You get a cute little baby. So like enjoy it, don't be scared, like enjoy your pregnancy and know that it's gonna be okay. Like you were meant to be there. Like if you weren't, then you wouldn't be pregnant. So enjoy it, don't be scared. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I didn't have I just thought, I was scared, but I was like, oh, I'm here and I'll just do
Yeah.
what I do. And I think it's important that you have to understand when you either the first time that you hear that you're going to be a father or even a parent, uh, that you you have to bring, for me, if you want to be the best parent, like now my journey is starting to align. I'm starting to come to awareness of what I want to do in this world. And you want to be a better parent, you have to bring light to what you don't know, or you have to be willing to take that step. And I wasn't at the time. So when she said she was pregnant, I was scared, but I didn't do any work because I was like, oh, well, my father did what he did and I'm here and I'll just continue that trend. And it's important to understand that you, if you don't do the work, you're going to emulate the closest intimate relationship that you witnessed or experienced growing up. And so as I bring that forward in talking about the pregnancy, is that I didn't do any work around any of that. I wasn't even in that realm or close to the realm. So when Grayson was born, or when she said she was, birthing, I didn't know about free birth. Like she talked to me a little bit about home birth, but I didn't know about free birth, and I didn't know a lot about women's innate ability to give birth. I really thought that like
I mean,
you need
most people, the average person doesn't understand that we all have an innate wisdom on how to birth.
yeah.
Like if every woman was completely alone in the middle of somewhere, pregnant, about to give birth, you would know how to give birth. Like you do not need someone to tell you what to do and how to do it. Like you would just know intuitively how to give birth. But we have gone so far away from that now we think we need these institutions and we need people to tell us what to do and how to do it. And the truth is we don't. But
Yeah, and I think it's important that
yeah,
like that was the first ever time that I went through that experience. So I didn't know what to expect. And then ultimately, like me not knowing that she innately knew what
I
she was
mean, I
doing.
didn't either with my first birth.
Yeah, so
I knew about home birth. So like I knew women could do it, but in my head, I still thought that I needed someone to tell me when to push and when the baby had to come out and when to do this. Like I still didn't know either
yeah, either way,
for
like
my first.
I think the point I'm going is, and I was long-winded, is that the nervousness came because I'm like, we have to get to a hospital. We have to be with the doctor.
Yeah.
And anything that was happening that is very common was
Yeah,
like,
like
holy crap, like something's happening. She's gonna die. Like
yeah.
I was in the fearful side of it. And that was just feeding
So
my
like the car ride to the hospital the whole time, like I felt every single bump and hole and everything. And I remember like I was complaining a lot because I was having, really strong contractions at this point. And every time I had one, like I was like, oh, and he's like, are you okay? Are you? And I was like, just freaking drive. I'm like, just get me to, like, I just want to be out of the car. So we get there. They don't think anything's going on because I'm so calm, cool, and collected. Like I'm breathing and I'm just like trying to stay relaxed. They check me and they're like, oh my God, you're 9 centimeters. We need to hurry you up to a room. And they put me in a room and, they have asked me like 300 questions that I could barely answer. And it was so annoying. Like what I found most annoying is I remember the nurse standing there with her clipboard asking me these questions and looking at me like, are you going to give me an answer? while I'm like mid contraction, and I'm looking back at her like, is this your first day on the job? Like, can a woman talk during a contraction? Because this is using up all my mental and physical energy right now. And she's standing there and she would repeat the question to me. And I'm like, all right, like, is somebody gonna tell this woman I cannot speak right now? And finally, like in the middle, like between one of the breaks, I remember looking at him and I'm like, can you answer some of these questions? I'm like, you know the answers. And I remember like that's all I could say to him because I was so angry at everybody in the room because I like have one woman with her half her arm up my, vagina. This woman's asking me 20 million questions, and then everybody else just like standing around staring at me. And I was like, I want to punch everybody in the face right now in this room. But anyway, I can't. They put me in the room, and then my grandma and him and Alex, they just start staring at me, and they're just like watching me. Like they're just standing there like watching me the whole time. Um, and very quickly I got
No one tells you what I was watching you because I was just intrigued and scared at the same time.
yeah, but they're like watching me like intently, and I'm just like, yeah, I don't know, no, like this does not feel good. I felt like I was on a stage and I had like an entourage, like a crowd of people watching me, and I was like, this no, like people need to stop looking at me right now. Like I don't want to be looked at, and I got naked as soon as I got in that room. Like they gave me that robe thing, and I took it off because my whole body was on fire, and I retreated to the bathroom because I was tired of the nurses coming and checking on me. My grandma was staring at me. Alex is staring at me. Everything felt hot, and the bathroom was all tile. It was so cold in there, and I remember it felt so good. And also, they have like those handicap poles on the wall, and I was using it to bear down. And at one point, a nurse comes in and she's like, "Are you trying to push?" And I was like, yeah. And I was like, damn it, I should have never said yes. So as soon as I said that, she's like, oh, no, no, no. Like, you need to get to the bed right now. So she makes me get on the bed. They do try to get me a squat bar after, them telling me to, like, as soon as I said I wanted to push, they call a midwife and basically it's like, okay, we're going to push. And there was no concern of, is your body truly ready? Because now that I know this, that I've given birth 4 times, and I've allowed my body to do the work instead of me for the last 3, I know that you get to a point where you feel like the baby's really there, but it's still not ready to come out. And that's where I was. Like, yeah, the baby was coming down, but I was not ready to push him out. So it took about 20, 30 minutes of pushing for him to be born because he wasn't ready to come out right at that moment. But on the squat bar, I got very tired. So I eventually, laid back down. I did the typical lay back in the hospital, legs up and push. And I remember I was like screaming through the pushes, and there's this nurse on my right ear, and she goes, you should really use that energy to push the baby out instead of screaming. And she just said it in such a snarky way. And I was like, this has got to be like so, like the worst people. Like it's almost like they hate their job. It was is what I was thinking, because I was like, here I am, I don't know, I've never given birth. Here I am doing this for the first time, and instead of people like being kind and open and loving and motherly, it's like, hey, dumb bitch, maybe you should stop that because that's not working. Didn't you know that? And it's like, no, I didn't know that. I didn't even know that you experience the ring of fire when you give birth. For my first birth, for some reason, all the reading research I did, I never knew you experienced the ring of fire. So
What is the ring of fire?
so the ring of fire is right as the head is crowning, which not every woman experiences it, but most women do. Right when the head is crowning, your whole vagina hole feels like it's literally on fire. Like somebody took a torch and like burned it. So baby's crowning, and I'm like, what is going on down there? And they're like, oh, that's just the ring of fire. I was like, the ring of what? I was like, but they didn't have to tell me twice because I was like, I could feel it. And I was like, what? And I'm literally laying there like, I didn't read about this anywhere. Like nobody told me about this. But anyhow, baby comes out, and because there was meconiums in my waters have broken a few minutes before he came out. There was meconium. They called a whole nother team into the room. So now the pediatric team is also in the room. There's like 15 people probably in the room by now.
Yeah, there was a lot.
Yeah, I don't know. There was like 10 or 15 people in the room.
I didn't count, but yeah, there was a lot.
And now there's like a bunch of men too, because there wasn't men before. And I was like, oh, this is great. This is just lovely. Like now we have a full show. So he comes out and right away, I don't touch him, nothing. They take him to a table and they shove
Well, he came out and they were and he wasn't like
yeah, he wasn't responsive.
responsive.
Yeah, well, babies are not supposed to cry the moment they come out of the
I'm just telling
vagina.
you what I
But I
remember.
know, I remember that too. But I know this whole notion that a baby's gonna cry the moment their head
Yeah.
comes out is also erroneous.
They freaked. I say they freaked out. They were moving fast, and what I was receiving from the one person I was talking is they were worried because there was meconium in the placenta, and that when the baby was born, when Grayson was born, he was not responsive for like the first, like I think it was like 15 or 20 seconds or something like that.
Which
And so they
it's
they
normal.
took him to the table and started shoving stuff down his throat.
Yeah, they started aspirating him.
Yeah.
Because the whole fear with meconium is that babies will aspirate it into their lungs, which makes it difficult to breathe. But take this, if the baby hasn't taken the first breath, how can they aspirate it? And like, and this is the whole thing with hospitals, like a lot of the things they do don't necessarily make sense. But their protocols, because I'm sure the one time it happened and now they implement this protocol and now every woman has to experience this no matter what. But meconium, you can look into it. I'm not going to give you a lesson on it. It doesn't have to be something that is feared just because there's meconium in your waters before your baby is born. But anyhow, so that all happened. And then I'm on the table looking over, like crying, like, I just want to touch my baby. I just want, and I didn't realize like I was going to have this flood of emotions, when my baby, like literally nobody talked to me about this stuff.
We have a kid coming.
But yeah, I had these flood of emotions, from not being able to hold my baby right away and all this stuff. They do put him on my chest. They let me do, what they call the golden hour in the hospital. And then I had breastfeeding lessons from a nurse that were horrible. She's like maneuvering and manipulating his jaw and like, pushing them onto my breast. And it's like, this is how you breastfeed. Nobody had ever told me how you breastfeed. So I was like, oh, I have to do this. But it felt so wrong that in my head, I was like, I just can't imagine doing this at home when I go home. I was like, this feels really wrong. But I didn't know any better. And they try to give him the Hep B vaccine. And I had no idea anything like where I stood on the stance of vaccines, but it just felt wrong. So I was like, no. And they were like, oh no, you really want to do this one? And I was just like, no, like this is retarded. Like my baby literally was just born 3 hours ago. Like why the heck would I inject him with a vaccine? So I was just like, I can always give it to him later. Like I don't have to say yes right now. So I was just like, no. And we said no to that. I said no to circumcision. I already had done my research on that and I was dead set on he was not getting circumcised. If you don't know anything about that, look up American Circumcision. Is a documentary. But basically, the extra skin on the penis is basically like chopping off the tip of your finger or anything or any type of body part. It belongs there. It's full of nerve endings. It has a function, and all the negative things you hear about it only exist in America. So you go to any other country and being intact is normal, and men know how to wash their penises. And as long as you know how to do that, you're going to be okay. But one just little side note on that too is a lot of people are afraid of the cleanliness of it because like, oh, how am I supposed to clean my baby now? You clean it just like a finger. You never pull back the skin because that can actually cause tearing and scarring in the penis. So the boys, you let them do that on their own time as they grow to retract themselves. We don't do that as parents. So like, and I had 2 boys, and like one of my boys' skin was very loose and he could retract himself at a very young age. And then the other one's skin was a lot tighter and he couldn't retract himself till he was much older. So you don't retract kids no matter what. That's something they do with their own body part. You just clean it like a finger, leave it alone. But anyway, I said no to that. And yeah, then it was like time to go home. The next day, filled out all the paperwork, all that stuff, went home. And it was really, really rough. I did have help for about the first 6 weeks. I had my mom and my grandma. After my grandma left, I think she was there for like another week, week and a half, 2 weeks after he was born. And then my mom came for another 3 weeks. And it was really, really nice to have the help because I was so overwhelmed with the breastfeeding and the laundry and the feeding the baby around the clock. And I had never, breastfed or been around anybody breastfeeding. And I had the most milk I've ever had with any child. And I had engorgement, I had pain. I breastfed for like 4 weeks, experiencing lots of pain, to the point that I regretted like every time I had to feed him. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to feed him again. Like all these things. And I was like slow, like I was in a community where I was like slowly learning and things like this, but I didn't have like that in-person support of someone like, it's okay, this is part of the process, this is how you do it, whatever the case may be. So it was, yeah, it was really rough. And then the nights, like something was going on with him. I don't know what. We took him to the doctors a million at a time and asked, but he would have this horrible, they said it was acid reflux, but I feel like everything's acid reflux. And if you never heard our story about our daughter with a brain tumor, she got diagnosed with acid reflux and really was a brain tumor. But anyway, side note. He gets diagnosed with acid reflux. Like he would have this horrible gulping noise and he wouldn't sleep at night. And it was really, really rough. And I remember like that was one of our biggest arguments because, I would wake him up in the middle of the night, like, please, like, take the baby for like an hour so I could just like close my eyes. And he's like, I have to go to work. Like, I don't get to sleep in. Like, I have to go to work. Like, that's basically on you. Like, that's your job. And I was just like, what the heck did I get myself into? Like, what is this really going to be life? Where I like made this baby with someone and they're going to assume no responsibility as far as like the taking care of the child. And that was really hard for me because I felt like I had to be the parent and that was never going to be his thing. So I don't know if you want to speak on any of, kind of been talking for a while.
I mean, it just goes back to, like doing the work, but
I mean, speak at the time. Like, what were your thoughts? What were you going through? What were you experiencing? Because like, we know where you are now, but like at that time.
I mean, I wasn't conscious to what was going on at a deeper level. Like on a surface level, I knew that as a man, I was supposed to provide. I was supposed to make sure that there's a roof over our head, there was food on our table, and clothes on our back. And I knew that my job, my responsibility lied within that. And that if I didn't do that, then I wasn't being successful as a man, or what I deemed, like what I was raised as, like that was what you were successful if you did that. The reality is that it goes so much deeper than that. And so at the time, you're asking me to do this. And I remember often the thoughts that came in my mind was like, you don't work, you're at home. Like you need to, like take care of the kids. I have to do this. And I don't want to say that I was insensitive, but I wasn't tapped into being able to hold the space of being there for her and just listening and understanding that she's doing this constantly and that 2-3 hours like she's asking for a break and she's asking for me for help, and I didn't see that. And a lot of I'm sure we'll talk about this, but a lot of what I've been doing lately, and I've come to the realization that your pain, right? The things that you've experienced, the painful moments in your life ultimately become your power, right? And what I mean by power is like your purpose in life. And, you experience these painful situations. Like I hear her talking about that time and it seems like it's another lifetime ago, but it also, I hear the pain in her voice still, right? And I'm not saying that she's has the, she feels the same thing now, but I hear that. And I also go back to that time in life and I'm like, wow, like I can see, where a lot of men are, and now just the transformation and understanding that, we all have a story. We all have a father or mother wound story, and that it's our choice to rewrite that story and become aware of it. We have to admit that we have some type of story or some type of trauma. We have to accept it, and then we have to bring awareness to it. And when you bring awareness to it, it's not that it disappears, it's that your ability to identify it when it comes up happens that much faster every time. And so now, like, now that I listen to that, I didn't have any awareness, nor did I admit that I had any trauma around my father and mother. And so, she's asking me for help, and I'm like, I'm being snarky, I'm being short. And when I look back at it from this perspective, I was just emulating something that I saw my whole entire childhood. And then as we went to our second birth and she took a lot more control, I felt even more uncomfortable because I'm like, it's my, like, it's my responsibility to keep her safe. And I was like, we're not free birthing, we're not home birthing, we're gonna birth in a hospital, and we're gonna.
Yeah. So I'm gonna wrap up one so we can go to two. So first birth, I joined a Facebook group in San Diego. It was all about like natural parenting and like holistic parenting and all this. And that's really where I got so much of the foundation of how I parent today was from that group. And it was mostly because my eyes were just open to a whole world that I didn't know how it like existed, like homeschooling, unschooling, not vaccinating, not keeping your children intact, eating healthy, like all this stuff. And I hung out with those moms a bunch, and that's where I learned. And I just started researching like all these topics, all these things that I didn't know. I also got interested in reading like books about child development, brain development, like, you know, all, like I said, a myriad of things of really the foundation of how we parent today and how we're raising our children. So fast forward, um, oh, and also like when I was pregnant, I was like, yeah, I'm formula feeding my kid because I knew nothing about breastfeeding, and I just assumed that that was the best and the healthiest for a child was to formula feed them. And then I ended up never formula feeding any of my kids. So do your research, it's out there, all the information. Um, he gets orders to Italy. Now we're in 2015. We get to Italy in April 2015, and shortly, like I think not even 2 weeks, I think a week and a half after getting there. Yeah, because it was during our in-doc that I found out. Um, I went to the hospital for a checkup, and they're like, "Oh, any possibility of you being pregnant?" And I was like, "Oh, maybe." And they're like, "Let's just do a test to be sure." And they do, and it was a Friday. So Monday, we had to go out for our intro into like Welcome to Italy. They take you to a few places around town, and it's like this whole class of like, we're going to try to ease the culture shock for you guys.
Mhm.
And we were at a restaurant eating, and they had wine, and I get the phone call from the hospital. I go outside the restaurant, I take the phone call. They're like, yeah, you're positive, like you're pregnant. And I was like, oh, great. Like I had no idea.
So you drunk?
And I was not drunk. I had taken like 2 sips of wine. And I come back and I put my glass of wine next to his, and I was like, I can't drink that. And he doesn't pick up on it. And I was like, okay. So I text him because we were sitting with people. So I text him, I'm like, come to the bathroom. And we go to the bathroom and like literally just tell him in the restaurant bathroom. I'm like, yeah, I'm pregnant. He's like, what? What do you mean? Ooh. And I was like, what do you mean? What do I mean? Like, this is happening again. So this time I'm in awareness of home birth, and I had already told him like, if I have another kid, like I'm having a home birth. I waited till I think week 20 or 25 before I brought it up. Try not to shake the table, buddy. Um, so I started going to the OB again because I was like, either way, like that's, we're now in Italy. Like if I need a midwife or anything, I have to go through the base. So I went to my OB and I was like, oh, like I'm interested in having a home birth. Like, what do I have to do? And he was straight like, yeah, no, you can't have a home birth. Like, we won't allow a midwife on base here because the base itself, like the Navy didn't have midwives there. So it would have to be like an Italian local midwife. And he was basically like, yeah, we're not going to give permission for a midwife to go onto base housing. And they had a birthing center at the time that was out in town. And I remember this woman telling me about it. Like, it's like, it's midwives and this. but I didn't want to go somewhere. Like, I was like, I don't want to go to a birthing center out in town, which at the time was like 35 minutes for us without traffic, to have my baby over there to then still have to drive back home. Like, that was my biggest thing. Like, I remember the drive with my first, and I was like, I'm not getting in a car. Like, that's just not an option. Like, I refuse to get in a car while I'm in labor, and I'm not going to show up at the beginning of labor to the hospital either. So I was like, that's just, it's not happening. So I was just like stuck. I felt stuck for like 10 weeks, and now I'm like 30 weeks pregnant, and I still can't pack my hospital bag. Like, I keep staring at the suitcase, and I have it next to, the kids' dresser, and I'm just like, I can't pack it. Like, I don't want to pack the suitcase. And, and then at the time I had known about hypnobirthing, and I had been YouTubing the videos of hypnobirthing, to do the practice, the breathing and all this stuff. And one day, like, on the YouTube recommends on the side, there was this video, and it says like free birth or whatever. But like the screenshot, I remember like the screenshot was like a woman, but she's like squatting in a creek, like out in the woods. And I'm like, what the heck is this? Like, this looks crazy. I was like, I'm watching this. Like, every YouTube recommendation that we get caught up, like, just scrolling and watching things. So I was like, I'm watching this. And I watch it, and it was like a 30-minute video. And the woman already had like 2 or 3 kids. And they say like it was her husband holding the camera. You can hear her toddler walking around. And she just has this yoga mat in this little creek. It's probably like an inch or two of water, like not a lot of water, but it's just like floating. And she's just squatting there, like having her baby on this mat. And I was like, this is crazy. I was like, what is this woman doing? I was like, this is so cool. And then, then YouTube recommends a bunch more. And I start coming across this term free birth. And I was like, okay, what the heck is free birth? Like, I've never even heard of this. So I now start binge watching. Like, I'm talking about hours and hours of these videos. And I already had seen home births with like midwives and doulas and all this, but I had never seen free births. And I started seeing free births, and it's just like women everywhere, just like having their babies on their own. And I was like, okay. It's like, I don't know what this is, but I like it. And then I also came across the term unassisted birth, and I found a book, and I bought the book, and it was like basically about giving birth at home by yourself without assistance. And shortly after, like, I learned about this, I tell him, I was like, this is what I'm doing. And he's like, no, you're not. Like, I'm taking you to the hospital. And I laughed, and I said, if you think you're getting me in a car in labor, like, have fun with that. I was like, because it's not happening. I said, I'm giving birth at home. And he was like really mad at my response. And I remember for like 2 weeks we didn't talk about it. And then finally he's like, what do I need to know? And I was like, well, good thing you asked. I said, you don't need to know anything. I said, I don't want you to be my midwife. I don't need you to be my midwife. Like, I'm giving birth to this baby. Like, you can do whatever you want. If you don't like it, you can walk out the door. Said, I don't need your help. Like, I got this.
And I remember feeling rejected, right? And there was a lot of anger behind it because I honestly didn't know. I wasn't aware of like the underlying message, like that she had, like she knew innately, and she's been doing the research, and she's been educating herself on, everything that potential possibilities and things of that nature, but like she was bringing positive energy into it. And so when she had said like, oh, you don't need to do anything, like I felt rejected because I didn't understand that what my role was in a free birth, or in birth in general. So it kind of launched me into this, like, I need to figure out what my purpose is here. And then ultimately, like, it came back to me going into my own fears and saying, you know what, okay, we're gonna free birth, but I'm gonna call the ambulance an hour later, after the birth. Like, we'll let the umbilical cord stay connected for an hour, we'll cut it, I made progress, but I still had some type of like fear over it.
I remember
Ultimately.
your biggest fear was hemorrhage too. Like, you kept
Yeah.
telling me like, you're gonna bleed to death. What happens if you bleed to death? Like, what am I supposed to do with 2 kids and no mom and all of this? And I had done my research as far as like the most common emergencies. And, you know, funny enough, again, so many of these emergencies, like if we sit down and we study and we do the research, we look at the statistics, you come to realize that usually it's outside of a physiological normal birth. So the moment you step outside your door, you're not having a physiological normal birth. Like the moment you go into a hospital, you go to a birthing center, you go anywhere, you are already subjecting your body, your baby, your psyche to things that you're not accustomed to. And let's reel it back for the people like, oh my God, this is mind blowing. What is she even saying? If you've ever seen a dog, a cat, a horse, an animal, anything. Okay. Our internet cut out for a bit. But hopefully what I was saying is like, if you ever seen any animal give birth, like humans know to one, leave them alone. Two, they like dark places, right? And what do you give a dog? Towels, like at most. But the point is, you don't interrupt the process because we understand that that's when emergencies happen. That's when dogs could, you know, lose the puppies or something happens to the mother or whatever. But yet when it comes to humans, we do the complete opposite. We're like, put them under bright lights, take them to a different environment, have lots of people, make sure you talk to them, make sure you tell them what to do with their body. It's like the complete opposite of what we see in nature, you know, for all the time. And it just doesn't make sense. Like when you sit and really think about it, it's like, why are humans the only species on Earth who all of a sudden don't know how to birth? It's a it's you know, it's crazy to think that. Like, of course we know how to birth. It's just we've been made to think that we don't. So, you know, that was my big thing. I was like, I'm not leaving my safe space. My safe space is my house, and this is where I'm going to stay. Like I was ready to invite someone to come into that space, but I was myself wasn't going to leave that space. So when it came down to it, you know, I went to all my appointments. I think my last appointment was like at 38 weeks. I think I gave birth with him at 38.5 or something like that. So when, you know, labor started around 3 p.m. and by 10:13 he was born. And, you know, it was a great birth. Like it was 7 hours. It was shorter than my last. I was breathing the whole entire time. I never once pushed, like literally just kept breathing. Baby comes out on its own because we have fetal ejection reflex. That is, our body literally will push the baby out. You can just breathe through it. You don't need to push if you don't want to. You know, I picked him up. He didn't cry the second he was born, but he, you know, I could see that he was like trying to wake up and figure out what just happened. Like birthing is an experience for the mom and the baby. Give them some time to acclimate, to come into this world physically, emotionally, spiritually. He was, you know, baby's still attached to the placenta and the cord. Like I know he's still receiving oxygen and all this stuff. Like I had read enough that I didn't really have any like big fears. There was not like a big thing. Like there's obviously the thought of like, yeah, something can go wrong, you know, like one of us could lose our lives. But once again, I was talking about the statistics. Yes, when you look at the statistics of all this stuff, the probability of them happening are so low. And when they happen, almost always, it's because there's been interventions. And people are going to say, well, you know, shit happens in home births too. Yes, but you have to see of what interventions were happening during that home birth. Like very rarely in undisturbed physiological birth are there big emergencies happening. I'm not saying that they do not happen. I am aware that they have happened. I was part of a free birth group, and unfortunately there were some sad stories and things that had happened. And that's part of also free birthing, is being able to take that responsibility of what happens if my baby isn't alive? What happens if something does go wrong? Like, am I willing to sit here with that choice and take that upon myself? And the answer for myself was yes, I was. Because the way I saw it, I was like, I can go to a hospital and something goes wrong, and the only difference is that I get to blame the doctor. I get to say, oh, it's his fault, you know. But I was like, at home, it's my fault, you know. And I was like, I'm willing to do that. Like I am willing to say, there's something happened, it's my fault, there's no one else to blame. And also like I had an understanding of, in reality, there's no one to blame in these situations. Like these things are just going to happen regardless of what we do. Like our paths are already there for us, and you can't, it's like saying, can you choose when you die? Like, no, you can't. Like it's just gonna happen. It doesn't matter. You can't run away from it. Like it's going to happen. And to me, that was like the same understanding I had with this. I was like, if something goes wrong, it's because it probably was meant to, because I can try my hardest to avoid it all and it could still happen. So I was just like, I am okay with the outcome of it. I'm not going to sit in this fear. So instead, I focused on all the good, I focused on all the positive, and I was never focused on, being scared and having this fear of like something going wrong. So anyhow, he was born, everything was great. Um, I get into bed with him, and it's been like about an like an hour since he was born. And Alex comes and he's like, hey, don't want you to get mad, but I called an ambulance. And I literally was like, at that point, I was like, okay, like what, what now? Like, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Just once again, it goes to the fears that I had, but ultimately, like when I look back at it and I think about it, I did heavily, like the decisions I made at that time. I was so not in tuned, had no connection to myself and like what I wanted for myself, or I didn't really have any type of stance or vision. And so a lot of my decision making was based off of what other people would think. I remember that our neighbors across the street were heavily traditionalists, and she was like, you need to call an ambulance and get them over here. I remember I cared a lot about what the Navy side was going to think about my wife having a birth at home.
Yeah, so I remember one thing I told him I wasn't telling anyone. He went ahead and told like a handful of our closest friends over there, and some of them were like HMs or corpsmen in the Navy. Like basically they work in the health industry in the Navy. And of course they're like, she needs to go to a hospital, all this. And I was like, dude, like, it's like going to the CDC and asking them, should you get a vaccine? Like the answer is yes. Like of course it is. And I was like, I don't care for anybody else's opinion. I was like, I'm not doing this to make anybody else feel good about themselves or feel like they're, taking care of me. Like this is my choice, my responsibility. And then as far as the Navy side goes, that was like his biggest fear. He was like, I'll get in trouble for this. Like they'll take money away or my pay or this or that. And I was like, they can't do that. I said, it's like if I have the baby on accident at home, are you going to get in trouble for that? And I said, worst comes to worst, tell them it was an accident. The baby came too fast. We didn't have time to get to the hospital. I said, and then what? What are they going to do? But I ended up during my research finding this woman who had free birth in Germany while her husband was in the army. And I messaged her and we talked, and she basically was like, yeah, no, they like nothing can happen, nothing can come from it. And that was like all the validation I needed. I was like, I'm doing this. So when we ended up going, the ambulance came, and they're literally children. They're like 19, 20 years old, probably have never seen a birth before. No, we asked them, they had never seen a birth before. I don't think they've even seen a newborn that fresh. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, you're supposed to tell me if my baby's okay, like you, who's never saw a newborn, and you're going to tell me, who just birthed him, if he's okay. I was like, I'm the mom. Like I know my baby's okay. Like I'm here with it. Like I'm here with him. Like I don't need some child to come tell me that my baby's okay. And then, they did the whole, like, you really should go to the hospital. I was like, that's not happening. And then they made me sign, basically the waiver that I was turning down the ambulance. And I'm like, you guys go back and have fun with that. I was like, I'm not going to the hospital. The only thing they did was they did clamp and cut the umbilical cord. But I kept the placenta in a bag. And then Alex, once again, the next day was like, we really should go to the hospital. And I was like, here we go again. So I was like, you know what? If this is going to make you leave me alone, let's go to the damn hospital and let's get this over with. Because I was like, I'm not doing this every day with you. So and for me, it was really like, I just wanted my birth. And since I got my birth, I was like, you could have the freaking hospital the next day. So the next day I got dressed and I took my baby to the hospital, and they did all their, their checks and prodding. They did their stupid PKU thing where they prick their heel, and he's like screaming and crying, and I'm here like crying too, and I'm like so mad at him, and I'm just like, I wish he could just disappear right now. and I told him, I was like, I'm not doing this ever again. I was like, I don't care what you say. Like, I have another child at home. I am not going to the hospital. And when we sat down with the doctor, and he's like, okay, so like, walk me through this. Like, what happened? And I was like, I went into labor and I gave birth at home. And he's like, was it a mistake? I'm like, nope. And Alex looks at me because we had agreed that we would tell them it was a mistake. And I was like, I don't care. I was like, what are they gonna do? Arrest me for having my baby at home? And then, and the guy's like so now the doctor's all flustered. He's like, what do you mean? And he goes into doctor mode. I'm gonna tell you how irresponsible. And I stopped him. I was like, I didn't come here for this. I said, I can assure you that I was completely confident and I was not scared and nothing happened. So I said, I didn't come here for this. And I shut him up. And that was like the first time I had stood up to an authority in that way, and basically was like, I'm not listening to this. Like, you can do this somewhere else, but like, I'm not hearing this. Like, I knew everything he was going to say. And my point to him is like, well, babies die in your hands too. Like, babies die in hospitals too. So what's your point? Like, we can both sit here and have this argument back and forth, but this isn't happening. So that meeting was very short after I, put a boundary up, and we left and we went home. And then I was pregnant again in 2017. And a month before I gave birth, yes, buddy?
It's 2018.
I was pregnant in 2017. I gave birth in 2018. So I was pregnant in 2017. We were still in Italy. And a month before I gave birth, we came back to the States. Mostly because I already knew that I wasn't going to have his support. And I was like, now it's kid number 3. I already have 2 toddlers. Like, there's no way I can make this happen by myself here. And at the time where we lived in Italy, we were about a 30-minute drive from the base on the side of a mountain. I didn't really have neighbors that I talked to. Like, it was a couple of Italian families, didn't really speak English. They were never there. Like, it was a vacation home, like housing complex. So there was barely people there other than like in the summer or the holidays, things like that. And I was like, I'm not like going to be on the side of the mountain by myself while you're working, all day long and traveling and all this. And I'm going to be here with 3 kids, like driving myself nuts. So I was like, I really want to go back to the States, because our time there was supposed to be up, but he had just extended for a year. So I basically asked him to cancel the extension, which he wasn't happy about it at the time. But I was like, you know what? I don't care. This is for my sanity. Like, I know I cannot be here with 3 kids, like mentally, because everything was on me. Like, the housework, the kids, everything. Like, Alex worked, like you said, put food on the table, had a roof over her head, but everything else was on me. And I was just like, yeah, I can't do this. So we ended up making it happen, come back February 2018. And she was born at the end of March. And, he already knew, like, I was going to free birth. I was like, I don't want a midwife. I don't want a doula. I don't want anything. The only thing that I was like, okay, I kind of want this, was a photographer. So I started looking on Instagram and like Facebook groups and things and asking around. And I knew specifically it had to be someone who was okay with free birth. I was like, I'm not having someone who doesn't even know what free birth is or has no idea. Like, I just don't want that energy in my space. And I found this amazing woman. She already had attended free births. Like, she knew all about it. She was a doula as well, if I'm not mistaken. I think she was like a doula photographer, or she had attended her friend's birth. But point is, she was okay with it. She's like, yeah, super cool with it. Like, don't have a problem. And we met, and she did our maternity shoot, and I loved her, and I was like, cool. Like, I'm cool with her being there. So when the day came, I started laboring at 5 a.m. and she was born by like 7 something, like early 7 o'clock, like 2 hours, like super fast labor. And with my third birth, that was the first one that for weeks, like 2-3 weeks, I thought I was going into labor. Like, every day I'm like, okay, today's the day. And it was like, no. I'm like, today's the day. It's like, no. And so finally, like that day, I didn't believe I was in labor until like an hour into it. And then I was like, oh great, like I have so much more to go. And then an hour later she was there. But I didn't intend on having a water birth. I like the water to relax in. So we had a big garden tub, and I got in the water mostly was to relax, like get the weight off my body and just like relax in the water. And when I was like, okay, I'm ready to come out of the water and like go give birth on land, I could not like get out. Like I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna stay in here. I'm not gonna force it. Like I really can't get out. Like physically, mentally, everything. Like I was just stuck in that place. And I was like, I'm just gonna stay here. So I ended up laboring in the water. And when she came out, she basically went from water to water, pulled her right up, and she was fine. Within a few minutes, she started crying. Everything was great. We went to our bed right outside the bathroom, and it was just like magical. Like, I don't need to go anywhere. I don't need to do anything. And I don't think I left the house for like a month or something like that. But my mom was able to come. My mom was actually there. I did not wake her up. I specifically told my husband not to wake her up. I was like, if this happens in the wee hours of the day, I'm like, do not wake her up, because I was like, I don't want her. My parents are still to this day, like my last pregnancy, they're like, so you're gonna give birth at home? And I was like, isn't that a given by now? I was like, what do you think I'm going to do? like they're still like, are you really not gonna have a doctor? I'm like, really? Like, are you guys really asking me this still? So I was like, don't wake her up. I don't want her to be freaking out. Like, I don't need that energy in my birthing space. So we didn't wake her up until after the baby was born. Like, one of the kids went running. It was like, yeah, the baby's here. And she was like, and yeah, and everything was great. Like, everything was great. The photographer took a few pictures, and then she left and let us be. And her kids were even there because her babysitter canceled last minute, and she asked me, and I was like, that's fine, like bring them, they'll just play with my kids. They were watching movies in the living room the whole time. Like, I never heard them, they never bothered me. Nothing. It was honestly like one of, like after my last, like having to go to the hospital, that whole experience, like I felt like dampened my postpartum. Like, that wasn't something I wanted to do. So this one, I just got to stay at home and be in my house and just be with my kids, and I didn't have to worry about going to the hospital or anything like that. And we also kept her placenta attached. So we had a lotus birth. After like 3 days, the umbilical cord dried out, and we froze the placenta. Eventually we buried it with an orange tree. I don't know, do you have anything to say about that birth?
I mean, it was just, it was the first time that I was really able to like tap in and like enjoy the birth. I did a lot of research around the topic. I wouldn't say inner work. I didn't do any inner work at that point, but I like on this topic alone, I was like, what's my fear of this, and how can I educate myself to make sure that that fear doesn't get in the way of, enjoying the moment, and then also just, not projecting on Jasil. And so I did that, and I was able to stay present and just be there and hold space for her. And I got, when she needed water, I'd get her the water. I had to heat up some pots of water because she was having, in the bathtub, the hot water, the warm water ran out. So
yeah, I mean, the tub was huge and the hot water tank couldn't
so
fill it.
I was back and forth on that, and at one point she was like, hey babe, just like please just stay here with me.
So like, if you've never attended a birth, been at a birth, know anything about women during birth, we hear everything. Like, we can hear you breathing, we can hear you thinking, we can hear your blood pumping through your veins. Like, you literally become like super aware of everything. So people sometimes think, oh, it's okay to go to the next room and whisper and like have a full-blown conversation. It's like, no, that is not the time to do anything other than to hold space and be super grounded and energetically cleansed and there for that woman who is going through this experience. So he kept walking in and out, in and out, in and out, and I just like the door was like in the back, like the and his steps, and I was just like, at one point I was like, I need you to stop. Like, I need you to just sit right here. Like, I was in the bathtub and I told him to sit right outside the bathtub. I was like, you just sit. I'm like, don't move. I'm like, just stay there. I was like, don't do anything unless I ask you. Like, do not move. Like, just be here. Because it's, people are not aware. They're like, oh, I'm walking quietly. I'm closing the door quietly. But we literally become hyper aware to everything that's happening. And, one thing that a midwife teaches very beautifully. She's called Wapio, and her school, I believe, is called like the Matrona or something. If you look her up on social media, but her name is Whapio. She's been a midwife for decades. She teaches about the altered brain states and how women, we go through that during birth, and like so many people don't recognize that, but it's kind of like if you're falling asleep and then somebody starts like tapping or doing something, like it's going to keep pulling you out of that sleep and pulling you out of that sleep, and it's because your brain is trying to go from alpha to from beta, from beta to alpha to delta to theta to all the different, and it's like these little interruptions keep bringing you out. And like that's the best way I could describe it to someone who's like never been there, is like, is if you're trying to fall asleep and then it's like that one noise you hear in the back of your head and you're like, can you please stop that? Like, I'm trying to fall asleep. Now imagine that like heightened 10 million times. And that's kind of what birth is. It's like you're literally traveling the world, the cosmos, the altered brain states. And that is why like going into these hospital environments is the complete opposite of what our body wants, because you're not able to go there. And that's why so many women feel this pain, is because your brain doesn't want to be here. Like your brain wants to go fly away into the galaxies, and you're being forced to like fully be here present in your body. And I can say with my fourth birth, I completely experienced a journey where I was not there. Like when I gave birth to her, I could not see. Like I was looking down and it felt like I had a film on my eyes. Like everything I could see, like the shapes and the colors, but nothing was in focus. And I remember like like what is wrong with my eyes? And like for a few minutes I could not see. And I knew that it was just the experience. Like I had gone so deep within myself, like I literally could not see. So yeah, my fourth birth was another super quick 2 hour from like 3:30 to like 5:30 in the morning. Super fast. Now we had 3 little kids. We woke them up, or they woke up. They woke up because it started like one came into the room, and then the second one came into the room, and then the third one came into the room. I was like, oh great. Here I thought I was gonna labor by myself. It's like 3:30 in the morning and everybody's awake. And then once they saw me like not laying down and sitting down, they were all like, oh, and I was like, you could tell them. The boys quickly were like, man, we're gonna go watch TV. And they went to the living room, put something on. But then Linabelle at the time, she stuck around. And Alex, I had given him the GoPro because I was like, I want some videos or pictures, of the birth. And she became obsessed with the GoPro, wouldn't give it back. And I was like, oh, well, like, there goes that. I guess we won't have any pictures or videos.
We have one, I think one picture.
We have like, yeah, like 1, 2. I think there's 2. Yeah. There's like 2 pictures right as she was born. And then like afterwards. Yeah. But, yeah, this, by then, like everybody knew the routine, what was gonna happen. It was very like, obviously I'm giving birth at home. When people talk about what do you need for birth and materials and this, towels, just like a dog, literally towels. Like that's all you really, really need. Can you do it with more? Yes, obviously. Like if you want to get other things, go ahead. But that's all I used in my last birth was just towels. That's it. Like we had a big plastic curtain that we had at home that we weren't using. We laid it on the carpet, and then we just put a bunch of towels on top, and that was it. Like I don't birth with anything special. I don't use anything crazy. You do not need to go spend hundreds of dollars on materials, on these birthing kits. Like I don't use any of that. I don't suction my kid's nose. When I give birth, they will learn how to breathe and get rid of the liquid on their own. It's unnecessary to suction a baby. Some moms will use their own mouths. I've never been called to, not my thing. Yeah, and then the umbilical cord, you can clamp it if you want, you can burn it, you can sterilize scissors and just cut it. You can just leave it on there and let it dry, have a lotus birth. Like there's millions of different way of doing that. Like you don't have to use a clamp. I've never used a clamp, never bought a clamp to use on my kid. So this one, we ended up cutting it because being baby number 4, everybody wanted to touch her. Everybody wanted to hold her. And it was just getting in the way. So we let it,
I think it was a day.
yeah, we let it like sit for most of the day. And by nighttime, I was like, let's just cut this poor girl's umbilical cord because it was like passing the hot potato between siblings and they were all fighting for her. So I was like, let's just cut her umbilical cord. So it's easier for the kids to hold her. And we just, like I said, a pair of scissors, some string, cut it ourselves. I don't know. What else do you remember?
I
Yeah.
remember something.
Yeah, I mean, really just being able to, I was able to drop down even more, from, Linnevelle's birth, and I was able to, she asked me to, help with putting pressure on her back, and I was able to
Yeah.
really control.
That was the first time I also, well, I asked you to hold my hand during Linnevelle's, but that was the first time I asked him to put hands on me because I felt he was relaxed and grounded. But like before that, I was like, don't touch me. Like, don't touch my body. Don't get me.
So yeah, I mean, it was a more enjoyable experience, and when I go back to earlier, I said that I felt rejected on when she said she didn't need anything from me on birth number 2. Uh, Birth number 4 was a little bit more of how I was hoping that I could be of service, and understanding. I think moving forward, in if having kids or teaching about this, is that like it's whatever the woman needs in that moment, and what's important is your ability to be able to understand yourself, to ground your energy, and be present and be able to do that on whatever's necessary for the woman. So the last birth was more enjoyable, probably the most enjoyable for me, because I was able to experience that connection. When you look at everything, like where joy comes from in life, it comes from connection. And so I was able to create an opening for my wife to say, hey, like, can you do this for me? And it brought happiness and joy to me. So that was the last one for me. And all of this is kind of springboarded me into uh, working with men and becoming better men and better fathers, and also educating men on free birth and home birth, and understanding that a lot of the times our fears are what sway our partner sometimes, when we're not, when especially for her, initially, from our first birth, I was projecting a lot. And so like my vision is to help men identify what traumas they've experienced in their life, by starting with the father and the mother wound, talking about it, getting explicit about it, admitting it, right? Accepting it, and then bringing awareness to it, so you can flush out that darkness and be able to fill it with light. And also within that journey, identify how they want to be a better father. Like what does a good father look like? And get detailed on that, so we can work towards that goal. And I truly believe that the world needs better men, because it's our job, it's our opportunity to raise the next generation. And what better way to educate and push ourselves and emulate, or show, so our kids can emulate. And that's been a driving force for me, because having 4 kids now, and being in a position to be that leader, to be rather than just be present, but also be aware of like what they need and what I need. Oftentimes, as men, we get focused outward and we're like, what does everybody need? We have this servant leadership style, but we also have to serve ourselves. So I'm nailing down some dates. I haven't solidified any dates, but in February and March, I'm going to do a few workshops around this, and later in this year, gonna run live with a 6-week container, and about what I call is the integrated father. and integrating both the masculine and the feminine, integrating our traumas, our pain to be our power, right? To build our purpose in life, and incorporate, our kids and being better fathers.
Yeah, I just remembered I didn't really talk about pregnancy with my third and my fourth. And my fourth, that's because I never went to a single OB appointment. I never saw a doctor. The only thing I did was I did go to a clinic to get a confirmation of pregnancy, for to be able to get the social security card and the passport and birth certificate and that stuff. And with my third, I only went halfway of the pregnancy because we were still in Italy on base, and you do need to utilize the base to get a passport to come back to the United States of America. So I mostly went just to get them on my radar, like, hey, I'm pregnant, we're gonna have another baby. Because in my head, initially we thought we would be giving birth there. But once I got to like 20 weeks, they did a whole Down syndrome scare of, you have these many markers and all this stuff. And after I did get a sonogram with her, and after that, I was like, this is why I'd rather not even go to the appointments, not get the sonograms. So after that, I never went to an appointment again. And it was a little harder to get my fourth birth certificate and social, but she was also born March 4 of 2020. So we all know what a shit show that year was when it comes to paperwork stuff. And it was, yeah, it was mostly because of that it took so long to get her stuff, but also because they kept requesting different things from me. I mean, finally it just came down to having a statement from friends with a picture of like their license and a signed statement saying that they saw me pregnant and that they saw the baby like soon after it was born, which we did receive a lot of postpartum help with my fourth child, and that was really nice to have like a community of people to come together and help us and like made meals for us and things like that, that it didn't fall all on us. And then my mom came like 2 weekends in a row too, which I'm like eternally grateful that she would make that drive all the way from New York City. Is like 7.5 hours, 7 hours to where we lived in Virginia Beach just to be with us for like 2 days, like 2 nights, things like that. So we definitely felt supported and loved by our community, by the fourth child, which was really nice. But yeah, we wanted to come on here to share these stories and share our transformation, how far we've come from being first time parents to now being the parents of four. And I did have 2 more pregnancies after that, but I'm not going to talk about that on this podcast. That'll be for another podcast. But yeah, it's just, it's a journey, it's learning, it's being able to want to source the information on your own, do the research, know that there's more than one place to read. And to me, more than, while research is helpful and, finding things online from what people would say accredited websites, I think what speaks volumes more than anything is people's stories, people's real freaking stories. So like, other than listening to statistics and this and that, like, just talk to people, listen to people, find those stories, like, outside of what the normal or the average or what's most common is, like, seek out those people, seek out that information, to see what else is out there, because so many of us are just, wrapped up in what we hear every day. And one thing I did really well, I'm not going to say like nobody's perfect at anything. I'm not perfect at setting up boundaries, but I've always been very good at creating boundaries, or fast to do that when needed. And one thing that I tell women all the time who want to birth differently than the average is, you don't need to allow anyone to tell you their horror stories. And that's not to invalidate that these things don't happen. They do happen, but if you're in a place where you're trying to cultivate something different for yourself, and you're trying to create this positive environment, and somebody wants to tell you about their horrible C-section, or about the doctor who, shoved their hand all the way down to their shoulder inside, like, you can kindly, nicely tell that woman, I'm trying to get pregnant, or, this is my vision, and that kind of story right now doesn't sit well with me, and that now's not the time for me to hear this. And also knowing to have that awareness with others. It's like, hey, I want to tell you something. Are you open to hearing this right now? Like, that's something that we don't practice enough with people. And we really should, before we just like dump negative or heavy things on others, or knowing who's that safe person that you can always just do that to. But that's just to say, while I was pregnant with like my first few pregnancies, people just wanting to tell you, oh yeah, when I was in the hospital, the doctor, ripped me to my asshole. And like, we don't need to go around telling women these horror stories. Like, yeah, they happen, but they don't need to happen to everyone. So just because it happened to you, doesn't mean that now we need to go around scaring everybody, thinking that happened. Like, there's so many things that, unfortunately, a lot of women think that their doctor saved them. Like, if I wasn't in a hospital, this and this, we would have died. And once again, it comes back to, well, what was the first step of intervention? Well, you left your house. There's step one. Then what happened? And it's like, there usually is a pattern that leads to that emergency, or that thing that seems like the doctor saved your life. So yeah, there's a lot there. If anybody wants to ever talk about this, message me on my Instagram or email us, whatever works, or leave a comment. I'm always open to talking to women about this. I posted like one video, I think from this past summer, it's like 2 hours long, talking about kind of my experiences and things like that on YouTube. It has a lot of random information and stuff. It was just like a round table talk with a couple of women who had questions and whatnot. But yeah, we wanted to come on here to say, Alex, now that he has gone through this journey, really wants to support men, because that's one thing that women, more often than not, don't come to me to ask me about birth advice, is what do I do with my man? Like, how do I convince him? And what I tell them is, personally, I don't think you have to. I didn't. And that's what I tell them. I said, I don't know how to convince a man, because I didn't. I said, but if you are not willing to make that stance with your man, then you need to figure that out. But I was like, I don't think any woman needs to convince a man on how she is going to birth, because that is your body, that is your baby, and it is your birth. And if the man doesn't want to be on board, like I told my man, there's the door. You can go out. I will call you when the baby's born. That's what I told him. I was like, you don't have to be here. I'm not going to force you to be here. And of course, there's the whole argument of, well, he's the dad. He should have like half the say. And my thing to him, my argument was always to him is, are you doing your research? Are you reading? Are you looking into your fears? And the answer was always no. And then I was like, well, then there's nothing to have. Like, there's no argument to be had. There's no conversation to be had. Like, if you don't want to put in the work, like I am putting in the work to become a parent, to do this, but yet you want to tell me which way I have to go, like, that's not valid for me. Like, we have to at least be on the same playing field.
We have to have a conscious conversation.
Yeah.
About
Like, it's not just like, oh, I don't want you to do this because it doesn't feel good to me. Okay, why not?
Yeah.
Like, is there something else there, or is just because, oh, I don't like that? I was like, that's not a conversation for me. That's not, and many women, I've spoken to many women who will give birth in a hospital because that is what their husbands are comfortable with. And I'm here to tell you, ladies, that's bullshit. And men, that's bullshit. No, you should not give birth in a hospital just because that is what your man wants you to do. Like, let them deal with their baggage. They need to figure that out. And yes, there's conversations that can be had in a neutral place, to where it doesn't seem like you're bulldozing them or anything. But we also have to take responsibility for what's ours and what's not. And that was like something I was very clear from my first free birth with him. And I told him that. I said, those are your fears. Those are not my fears. Like, I'm not carrying your baggage. Like, you want to have those fears? Carry your backpack. But do not ask me to put that backpack on myself, because I'm not. I was like, that's not my backpack. I'm not carrying it. And I did it. And, I understand that not every woman can do what I did, but at least start having those conversations and finding the way of how to have a win-win situation for all. And my thing was, I shouldn't have to, be in because to me, giving birth in a hospital was just, it's intrusive, it's invasive, it's abusive. So, for me, it was like, you're asking me to go be abused by people who don't know me, because you're scared. And to me, that was a no. Like, no, I'm not going to go ask someone to abuse me because you don't like, like you're scared of XYZ. And it's only happened to like 1% of the births or whatever the case may be. And the percentages for these emergency also vary from home birth to hospital births once again. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I want to do this work is not because, oh, like women are going to her. It's because I didn't have that
Yeah.
when I went through the process, and I experienced. There's so much more that we haven't talked about, but like there was so much more painful moments in my life that I didn't have. I felt like I didn't have anybody to be able to go to,
Yeah.
and now that I've been able to experience support from other men that do work, that are doing, men's work, I want to be able to give that in the support of, through fatherhood and knowing that, like that is one of the biggest gifts that we have, is to be able to lead people, or lead our kids, and being, I don't want to use the term successful, but being, like leading them to be what they want to be, the best versions of themselves. And so that's why I'm doing this work, is because when I look back, yesterday we went skating as a family. I got to experience joy watching my kids, and it took me back to when I was a childhood. And I'm like, dang, my dad never came to the skate rink. I grew up skating all the time, and I always went by myself with friends. And being able to see my son's face and my girls trying to skate at the age they are, that is why I want to do this. Because at the end of the day, all joy that we experience in this life comes from some form of connection.
Yeah.
And I want to help men be able to connect.
And also, which once again, it's hard to understand this if you haven't experienced both sides, but like the experience of a father in a hospital, kind of like feeling like lost, confused, that the doctors are there to help and this and that, versus like the father who's fully connected and whole and there for his woman, to hold that space, to create that safety haven for his woman. Like, you experience the birth way different. And like having like a woman giving birth doesn't only birth a new mother, it also births a new father, but it's all about that experience he's having. There's so many men who are disconnected from their children and they have no idea why, and it comes back to the first instant they ever met. It's like, what was that first experience like? How did you see your woman like bring this child into the world? Like, what were your thoughts of her? What are your, like, what did you see? Like, did you see her being abused and tied down and treated like worse than an animal? Because we don't even treat animals like that when they give birth, and it's like, or did you see her in her full power, in her full feminine essence, when she gave birth? Like, so much of that has to do with the connection you have as a couple to the child, to then your postpartum. What does that look like? How easeful is all of that? It all comes full circle. And to me, that's really what it was. It's just bringing it back to the family unit, bringing it back to us, and doing what felt right for me. Like, I didn't have people telling me, oh, this is the way you must do it. Like I'm saying, like I was the first one that I know of in my community and my family and everything that gave birth this way. It wasn't like I grew up knowing this. It felt right. Like, once I knew about it, I was like, this feels good, this sounds great, and this is what I'm gonna do. So yeah, like, do your research, go out there, or just follow your intuition. Like, there's some women who never read a book, never do anything. They just do what feels right. Like, that's good too.
Yeah. So thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with us. And I hope, if this impacted you, that you can share this and pass it along to someone that may need this or hear it, and continue to follow. And
yeah, Alex is gonna be talking to the men for the next few weeks, just to hear their stories, to see how is it that men want to be helped. Like, where is it that men most need support and assistance to be these fathers and be these men in the world. And eventually, like he said, that's going to be some free webinars and courses online, and eventually it's gonna, be a paid program to where men can attend and do this in a container with the support of other men. And just like women, like men need men, women need women, men need men, we need each other. We all have to be here doing the work, because it doesn't make sense for us women to be doing all this work and leveling up, and then our men are just staying behind. Like, we all have to be doing this work. We all have to be in it. That is how we level up as a species, as a community, as an entire world. Like, it's all of us. We're all parenting the next generations together. This work is for all of us.
I love what she said. I'm not going to piggyback. So have a good day.
See ya.
Bye.
Okay, you want to say something? Grayson wants to say something. Do you want to introduce yourself? Say, hi, I'm Grayson, I'm 9 years old. You gotta put your head up, buddy.
Yeah, come on.
It's still on the video.
Say something.
Well, now it's time right
Okay, would you like to say something, buddy? Do you want to say just bye?
about. I want to say something about moon.
Okay, go ahead. You can say something about Lumi.
Lumi's our fourth.
Lumi is baby number 4.
I wanted to hold her.
Yeah?
Mhm.
Did you get to hold her?
But I want another kid to hold it
Why?
because I like babies.
What about when you're 18? You can have a baby.
I don't want to have one.
Why?
I don't want to.
But we have to have a baby for you so you can hold it. What about we'll just help the Academy to have a baby?
Mm,
No, that doesn't work for you.
You want a baby that you can call your brother or sister. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, if you want to go with.
Sounds like we're going to have a baby.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you want to say bye?
Bye.